Hey, what's going on, everybody? Brent Hyden here, coming at you on this Monday morning, talking 6 games around the NBA. A quick reminder before we hop into the games, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button down below. That way you get notified whenever I post a new video. If you're not already following me on Twitter, my Twitter handle at BrentonHyden1 is in the description down below. Also in the description is my Patreon page, patreon.com/Brent Hyden. If you're not already signed up for my daily content projections, breakdowns, and Discord chat, you can head over to my Patreon page and look at the monthly options that I have available over there. Or if you would rather, you can sign up for a one-time affordable price, 50% off for the rest of the season. That'll carry you all the way through the playoffs. But without further ado, let's hop into the games. We do have 6 games on the slate. Starting with Boston at Brooklyn. Boston 4.5-point favorites in this one. A 221 over under. Aaron Baines, Jared Dudley are out. Allen Crabbe, Karis LeVert all remain out as well. Rondé Hollis-Jefferson practiced yesterday. He is questionable, and Kyrie Irving, dealing with a leg injury, is questionable for this game. The Brooklyn Nets, I'm going to talk about them first. They're in a little bit of a tough spot here against the Celtics. There are a couple areas that I do want to attack here. That starts with D'Angelo Russell and Spencer Dinwiddie. Both of these guys carrying the load offensively without LeVert and without Allen Crabbe. Russell 32% usage rate, 1.12 fantasy points per minute whenever you take all those guys off the floor. He's been really good lately, averaging 21.3 points, 6.7 assists, 3.6 rebounds per game, shooting almost 47% from the floor during that span. He does have several really strong games, especially against the Raptors. Chicago, a really good game there. Solid game against Atlanta as well. I have interest in both him and Spencer Dinwiddie. Dinwiddie been in a little bit of a slump recently, but he's also interesting. Boston, we know they're a team that struggles against guards that can actually drive into the paint and hit shots in the paint and mid range. Over the last 10 games, they're allowing almost 44% shooting in the paint. Dinwiddie taking 22% of his shots there in the paint. D'Angelo Russell taking 44% of his shots in the paint or mid-range. Boston has really struggled as well in the mid-range, allowing 42% shooting in the mid-range. I think D'Angelo Russell or Spencer Dinwiddie, one of those two, is going to have a really good game here. I'm going to lean towards Russell slightly, just because of the shot selection and the fact that he's going to obviously get first dibs at coming out of the gate hot. But you can use Spencer Dinwiddie as well. I think he might be a little bit safer for cash games. Joe Harris is fine in cash. He's 4,500, 4,700 on FanDuel. Outside of that, DeMarre Carroll, a really strong mid-range option. If we do get news that Rondé Hollis-Jefferson is out, DeMarre Carroll comes in at 4,700 on DraftKings, 4,600 on FanDuel. I don't have a lot of interest in Jarrett Allen. I think I'm going to lean towards Ed Davis as the better option here. We've seen Jarrett Allen at times really struggle against mobile big men. Obviously, Al Horford, a mobile big man, but 5,200 is interesting at his price tag. The minutes just haven't really been there. The production hasn't been there of late. I'm going to lean a little bit towards Ed Davis as a very strong value option. 3,700 on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel. I obviously like him more over on DraftKings. He's a guy you feel pretty confident most nights going to get you 20 plus fantasy points, and he does have rebounding upside in this spot against a Boston team that ranks 27th in defensive efficiency to centers over the last 10 games. I don't know that I would want to chase the Rodions Kurix games. Last time these teams faced off, Brooklyn was really shorthanded. He played 28 minutes, had a really strong game. You can still roll him out if you want in tournaments, but I'm not going to be chasing that outing. On the Boston side of things, obviously the status of Kyrie Irving is really important to monitor. If he plays, he is in a fantastic spot here tonight. It is a spot that I do really like him. He's been solid of late, has been playing limited minutes because Boston has been involved in some blowouts, is averaging less than 30 minutes per game over his last 5 games, taking 36% of his shots in the paint or the mid-range. Brooklyn allowing about 44% shooting in both of those areas. 28% of his field goal attempts are above the break threes. Brooklyn really struggling to defend above the break threes, allowing 36.4% shooting this season. I really like Kyrie Irving, 9K on DraftKings, 8,900 on FanDuel. If he sits, obviously Terry Rozier and some of these other guys, Marcus Smart, Jaylen Brown, become more interesting. Al Horford finally saw 30 minutes, or saw his minutes limit increase to 30 minutes last game against Orlando. Played 30, put up 40 fantasy points. This is a Brooklyn Nets team that we know gets pummeled by big men, and if Kyrie Irving sits this game out, he would actually be involved a little bit more in the offense. I still like him. 6,200 on DraftKings, 6,700 on FanDuel as a cash game center with a little bit of upside in this spot. I do love Marcus Morris. Continues to be a strong cash and tournament option. Has been lighting it up from three. His shot profile matches up really, really well against this Brooklyn team. And he also sees a boost if Kyrie Irving is out. Usage and production goes up in that spot. Jason Tatum, Gordon Hayward, Jaylen Brown, guys that you can sprinkle into your tournaments. Tatum a little bit more consistent than the other two. But again, if Kyrie Irving misses this game, obviously would be a boost for those guys. I like Marcus Smart as a strong cash value here. He comes in at 4,600 on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel. Just a guy that you can feel pretty comfortable has some upside with his blocks and steals that he can notch. Moving on to Memphis at Houston. Houston 6.5 point favorites in this one. 203 over under. Chris Paul, Eric Gordon, Chandler Parsons, Kyle Anderson, and Dylan Brooks all out for this game. JaMychal Green has 3 double-digit efforts on the boards in his last 4 games. James Harden continues to shatter just about everything, every record imaginable. Yeah, it's just insane how good he has been. Mike Conley averaging 22.2 points on 46% shooting from beyond the arc over his last 5 games. I had interest in Kyle Anderson whenever I started breaking this game down, and then news came out that he was going to miss. For what it's worth, I think that's going to lead to Justin Holiday getting a few more minutes. He's been absolutely atrocious since joining the Grizzlies, but I think he's a perfectly fine tournament value. JaMychal Green and Shelvin Mack are the guys that I think are going to see the biggest boosts in this spot. JaMychal Green averages 6.6 fantasy points, an increase of 6.6 fantasy points per 36 minutes whenever you take Kyle Anderson off the floor. I have a lot of interest in him. Obviously coming off 2 really strong games, but I did mention the rebounding upside. He's been really good since he broke out against Houston last time out, averaging 15.6 rebounds in 22.5 minutes in the 2 games against the Rockets this season. I have, again, a lot of interest in him here tonight. Just a guy that I do feel pretty comfortable, has some upside at his current price, 4,800 on DraftKings, 4,900 on FanDuel. Going to be a guy that I'm going to be probably building my lineups around tonight. Mike Conley, I did mention, he's really struggled with consistency, but his minutes and role in the offense, really, really interesting in this spot. I don't hate him at 7,600 on DraftKings, 7,800 on FanDuel as a cash or tournament option. It's just a really solid spot for him. Obviously, the Rockets without Chris Paul, not as good defensively, although I do have to give Austin Rivers credit. He has been a decent defender this season. Conley, a pretty strong performance against Houston last time out. I think JaMychal Green or Jaren Jackson is a perfectly fine tournament option. Obviously, foul trouble is going to be an issue whenever you have someone like James Harden who takes so many of his shots at the rim. Marc Gasol just a little bit too cheap still, 7,300 on DraftKings, 7,800 on FanDuel. I'm perfectly fine with him in cash in tournaments as well. Houston really struggling to defend in the paint. They're also really struggling to defend at the rim. They're giving up 52.6 points in the paint and 68% shooting at the rim. While Gasol doesn't take a lot of his shots at the rim, only taking 21% of his shots at the rim, he does take 32% of his shots in the paint. So this is a pretty good spot here for Marc Gasol. I like him in cash in tournaments. And then, as I mentioned, Shelvin Mack, someone that you can look at in tournaments as well. 3,400 on DraftKings. He's a really good at 3,600, a really good drop score candidate for FanDuel. You do expect him to get in the mid 20s in minutes, and this is a spot where I would not hate getting some exposure to him tonight. On the Houston side of things, it's going to be the same story as it is every single night now. James Harden, 42% usage rate over his last 10 games, averaging 40.8 points on 40.8% three-point shooting. He's making 11.1 free throws over that span, 9.6 assists, 7.2 rebounds. It's James Harden. Obviously, the Memphis Grizzlies, not the best matchup on paper. That being said, over the last 10 games, they've allowed opponents to shoot 63.3% at the rim, along with 39.1 percent 3-point shooting. This is a spot where James Harden should just feast. Harden dropped 82 fantasy points on the Grizzlies the last time these teams faced off. People are going to fade him because of the matchup. He's a great option. I don't really care that it's the Grizzlies or that this game is going to be ridiculously slow paced. Neither one of these teams plays at a very fast pace. Grizzlies 97.3, Houston 99.2. Don't let anyone try to talk you into this game being a paced up matchup for anyone on this taking the court tonight. Austin Rivers, really strong cash tournament option based on his minutes, shot selection. 59% of his shots come from three. Just continues to be a guy playing a boatload of minutes. Did have a really good game last night. But when you're only paying like 4,700 on DraftKings, 4,900 for a guy that's playing 37, 38, 39, 40 minutes most nights, yeah, it's really tough to overlook. The same story. It's the same story for PJ Tucker. Again, not the greatest of matchups. 4,400 on DraftKings, 5,200 on FanDuel. He's still playing like 36 plus minutes every single night. His role is pretty much stand in the corner, shoot threes, grab some rebounds, get you some steals, defend really well. Takes 52% of his shots from the corners, where Memphis is allowing 40.2% three-point shooting. 70% of his overall shots come from three. As I mentioned, Memphis 39.1% three-point shooting allowed over the last 10 games on above the break threes. Gerald Green, Daniel House, strong tournament values here. It's worth noting if news doesn't come out today that Daniel House signs a fully guaranteed contract, today is the last day he can take the court for the Houston Rockets before being sent down to the G League. That might be something motivating him a little bit tonight. Clint Capella, perfectly fine in cash and tournaments here tonight as well. Continues to be just a monster on the board. 7,500 on DraftKings, 9K on FanDuel. Double-digit rebounding potential. Obviously, the matchup not great, but I still think he is a perfectly fine option. Moving on, Charlotte at San Antonio. This is a pretty interesting game to talk about. San Antonio, 8.5-point favorites in this one, 223 over under. Cody Zeller and Rudy Gay continue to sit these games out. San Antonio's defense much improved of late, 107.3 defensive rating. There's still some spots that we can attack them. Kemba Walker is one of those spots. He has really struggled recently, averaging just 30.8 fantasy points on 20.3 points per game, 3.5 assists, and 3.7 rebounds. Spurs ranked 21st in defensive efficiency to point guards on the season. He's 7,900 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. It's just way too cheap for the upside he has. I know he's been really terrible, but if you're playing tournament lineups, Kemba Walker is the perfect play here tonight. He's going to bounce back at some point. Obviously, without Zeller there, usage 32% or so, does take a hit in production because his pick and roll partner isn't there, but I still think this is a great spot for Kemba Walker to potentially break out, and in tournaments, it would be pretty reckless to completely overlook him. Marvin Williams, I have a lot of interest in Marvin Williams here. Spurs ranked 28th in defensive efficiency to power forwards on the season. They're allowing 23 points, 11 rebounds, 50% shooting, and 34.4% three-point shooting to the position. The Spurs, over the last 10 games, have allowed 37.7% on corner threes. 19% of Marvin Williams' shots are corner threes. We also know that he's going to get some time playing the backup center because Bismack Biyombo and Willie Hernan Gomez not playing 48 minutes combined between the two of them. He is top 27 fantasy points in 6 of his last 10 games. He's just 4,900 on DraftKings, 5,700 on FanDuel. This is a really good spot for Marvin Williams, who has been playing really, really well of late for the Hornets. I like him a lot in cash and tournaments. Nick Batum can be sprinkled into GPPs. Jeremy Lamb is a cash option. Biyombo, Hernan Gomez, they're guys that you can use. And again, neither one of those guys is playing very many minutes. They're not playing in combined 48 minutes. They're not going to do it tonight, most likely, unless one of them just comes out and just has a monster outing in their limited minutes. That being said, again, in tournaments, you can look at him. Tony Parker should suit up for this one. Sat out last game because it was a back-to-back revenge game. If he comes out and he's playing really, really well against a Spurs team that does tend to go small a lot, I could see Tony Parker getting a few extra minutes here in the spot, and I have a lot of interest in him at 3,400 on DraftKings, 3,900 on FanDuel, another drop score candidate over there. Obviously, with Rudy Gay out, we don't need to worry about him. But Bryn Forbes, Derek White, two guys that I have a lot of interest in this spot here tonight, going up against Charlotte. Charlotte really struggling to defend opposing backcourts. Derek White, the guy I have the most interest in, he sees a 2.5% usage boost and averages just over 3 fantasy points more per 36 minutes. Charlotte allowing 66.3% shooting at the rim over the last 10 games, 45% field goal percentage in the paint. Derek White taking about 60% of his shots in those areas. Derek White, 5,400 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel, continues to put up really strong numbers. When he's not scoring, he's getting blocks, he's getting steals, he's getting assists, rebounds, things like that. Obviously, the shot's not going to fall for him every single night. It's just not going to happen. But he continues to be mid to upper 20s with upside. I love Derek White in cash in tournaments here. I mentioned Bryn Forbes, another guy, continues to just put up really strong games on a nightly basis. Some nights he's going to, have a ceiling game, get you, 30, 40 fantasy points. But most nights he's going to get you in the mid-20s, and I'm perfectly fine with that in cash games. I really like DeMar DeRozan playing about 70% of his minutes this season at small forward, where Charlotte really struggles, 22nd defensive efficiency. I've harped on it recently, but the rebounding upside and the assist upside has really been there for DeMar DeRozan. He's coming close to notching, triple doubles some of these nights. Obviously, again, the last game against OKC was not great, but the game before that almost had a triple double against Detroit. He's got tons of upside. I have a lot of interest in him. I also really like LaMarcus Aldridge. He's been outstanding of late. 8,200 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. I would definitely recommend getting one of the two, DeMar DeRozan or LaMarcus Aldridge, in your lineups tonight. It's a really good spot for both. Outside of that, Marco Bellinelli hoisted 10-plus field goal attempts in 3 straight games, has top 20 fantasy points in each of those. Rudy Gay now being out, Bellinelli's going to see a few extra minutes and a few extra shots, and he makes for a pretty strong tournament option or value option in this spot. It's also a revenge game for Marco Bellinelli, I believe. Is it not? I guess let me look and see before I move on. Marco Bellinelli. Yes, it is a revenge game for Marco Bellinelli. I could have sworn it was. 2016-2017 is when he played for the Charlotte Hornets. But moving on to the next game of the night, not one that I'm going to spend a whole heck of a lot of time on. Detroit at Utah. This game is, ugly. Henry Ellenson is out. Zaza is doubtful. Thabo Sefolosha, Raul Neto, Ricky Rubio, and Dante Exum all out for this game. Ish Smith is probable for this game. Detroit, I don't really have a lot of interest in Detroit. I did talk about Andre Drummond and Blake Griffin a little bit in the breakdown. Obviously, guys you can look at because they dominate the usage. Blake Griffin leads the team in usage just shy of 30%. Andre Drummond just a little bit, just well below him at 23.5. I think the guy I have the most interest in is going to be Reggie Jackson. He comes in at 4,800 on DraftKings, 5K on FanDuel. And the only reason I'm really even considering him here, 37% of his field goal attempts are above the break threes. Utah is allowing 37.3% on above the break threes. He's a little bit too cheap here to completely overlook. I also think Reggie Bullock is interesting. 41% of his field goal attempts are above the break threes. He's 4,500 on DraftKings, 4,700 on FanDuel. He actually had a pretty solid game against Utah last time out, put up 27 fantasy points, took a decent amount of shots. He continues to play a lot of minutes. He's going to get you, 13, 15, 16 real points, has some rebounding assist upside. I don't hate taking a shot on Reggie Bullock, especially if you're going to be loading up on the Utah side of the game, which is where I'm going to move to next. Mitchell, 37.3% usage rate, 1.22 fantasy points per minute. Whenever you take all those guys off the floor, obviously Donovan Mitchell is a fantastic play in this spot here tonight. As the team's point guard, you do project. I project him for about 38 minutes, a little over 40 fantasy points. He's 9,200 on DraftKings. He's 8,800 on FanDuel. Obviously, those prices not terribly appealing, but 50 plus fantasy points in 3 straight games since Rubio and all these guys have been out. Had a good game against Detroit last time out. The fan that was heckling him really motivated him, and he's been really good since then. He's basically a core option for me here tonight. If I can afford to pay up for him on DraftKings, I will. But I don't know that I'm going to be locking him in my lineups, but I'm going to be heavily considering it. Royce O'Neal. Obviously, with Raul Neto being out, Royce O'Neal still going to be an intriguing play. Has played 37 minutes in back-to-back games. Has topped 30 fantasy points in each. He's 4,700 on FanDuel, 4,900 on 4,900 on FanDuel, 4,700 on DraftKings. I'm fine with him in tournaments. I would probably be fading at this point in cat or I'm fine with him in cash games. I would probably be fading in tournaments at this point. Rudy Gobert, Derek Favors, two really, really strong cash and tournament options here tonight, just given Detroit's issues defending in the paint. 51.6 points in the paint allowed per game, 68% shooting, 68.6% shooting allowed at the rim. Detroit also giving up 35.4 defensive rebounds per game. Favors and Gobert, two guys taking a boatload of their shots at the rim this season. Rudy Gobert, 87% of his shots come at the rim. 68% of Derek Favors' shots come at the rim. 13% of Favors shots come in the paint. Again, an area where Detroit really struggling to defend. Favors has been pretty solid recently. Did have a down game against Orlando, but still getting you in the mid to upper 20s with upside. Had a good game against Detroit the last time these teams faced off, putting up 30 fantasy points. I like him. I think Jake Crowder is perfectly fine in cash or tournaments as well. It is worth noting he has been atrocious, 3 of 24 from the floor over his last 2 games. Moving on, last couple games of the night, Portland at Sacramento. Sacramento 2-point favorites in this one, 227.5 over under. This game is a little bit more interesting. Mo Harkless is doubtful for this game. Buddy Hield averaging 22.3 points in January, shooting 53.4% from three-point range. I'll get to that in just a moment, but on the Portland side of things, Damian Lillard has really struggled recently, coming off a pretty solid game against Denver. 41 fantasy points, has been over 40 fantasy points in back-to-back games. That's appealing. Sacramento, obviously the matchup really, really strong here for Damian Lillard. Had a good game against him last time out, 41.5 fantasy points. Had to play 41.5 minutes, but fast-paced game here for Portland. Kings giving up 115.6 points per game to opponents. Obviously, Damian Lillard is in a strong spot here. Sacramento giving up almost 66% shooting at the rim. Damian Lillard taking 35% of his shots at the rim. CJ McCollum has had a rough season. Had a big outing against the Sixers and the Kings, or the Sixers recently. Had a big outing against Charlotte as well. That being said, I think he's perfectly fine in tournaments. Kings really, really struggling against shooting guards, allowing him to shoot 46.1% from the floor, 37.5% from three. Very good tournament option here. I really like Al-Farouq Aminu. Has top 20 fantasy points in each of his last 10 games. 5K on DraftKings, 5,500 on FanDuel. Sacramento really struggling to defend. Power forwards and centers are giving up over 48 rebounds per game to opponents. Aminu is just way too cheap, I think. For the safety that he provides. 31 fantasy points against this team last time out. I really, really like him. And then Jusuf Nurkic. I don't think I have to remind anybody what Jusuf Nurkic did against the Kings last time these teams faced off, but I'm going to do it anyways because it was a just monster stat line. 24 points, 23 rebounds, 7 assists, 5 blocks, and a career high 5 steals. Obviously, he's not gonna notch a 5 block, 5 steal night again. But Jusuf Nurkic at 8,600 and 8,800 on FanDuel in a spot where against the Sacramento team that ranks 26th in defensive efficiency to centers, given how good Nurkic has been playing recently, really, really tough to overlook him in this spot tonight. I have a lot of interest in Jusuf Nurkic. It's a guy that I'm going to consider building my lineups around. You could look at Zach Collins, Jake Layman, Myers Leonard on FanDuel, where you can drop their score if they don't produce. Evan Turner, a very strong cash option in this spot tonight. On the flip side of things, De'Aaron Fox, really, really good for the Kings this season. He's more of a tournament option here. I really want to target the guys that shoot a lot of threes against Portland because Portland has really struggled to defend the three-point line. He has top 40 fantasy points in 5 of his last 10. Portland's allowing opposing shooting guards to shoot 43.4% from the floor, 39% from 3. Only 20% of his field goal attempts come from 3. Solid floor, some upside in the spot. I still really like him. 7,800 on DraftKings, 8,600 on FanDuel. Buddy Hield, 34% of his shots are above the break threes. Portland allowing 38.3% on above the break threes. I mentioned he has been shooting 53.4% from three-point range. I think Buddy Hield is my favorite way to get exposure here. 6,600 on DraftKings, 6,500 over on FanDuel. Obviously, his production has taken a little bit of a dip recently, but I would expect that to bounce back. This is a pretty good spot for him. Had a really strong game against Portland last time out. I really like him in the spot. I like Bogdanovic. He's a really strong option in cash and tournaments. Has top 30 fantasy points in 5 of the last 10 games. 38% of his shots are above the break threes. I think Iman Shumpert is a really, really strong value. We've seen Portland really struggle against small forwards. They're allowing them to shoot almost 41% from 3. Iman Shumpert, 3,800 on DraftKings, 3,700 on FanDuel. Has not been that great recently, but last time against Portland, 25 minutes, 23 fantasy points. He's someone to at least consider. And then Marvin Bagley, I think he's a really, really strong tournament option here. 4,800 on DraftKings, 5,700 on FanDuel. Has been solid in back-to-back games since returning from injury. This is a spot where he could have some upside here because Portland has really struggled against opposing power forwards. They've allowed 22.6 points, 11.4 rebounds, and 2.9 blocks and steals to the position. Not the best spot for Willie Cauley-Stein, but he's had a decent history against Portland, and they're giving up a decent amount of second chance points. 7K on DraftKings and 7,500 on FanDuel. Not a terrible spot here for him. Obviously did struggle against Portland last time out, but historically has played pretty well against the Trailblazers in the past. Moving on, New Orleans Pelicans at the Los Angeles Clippers. This is going to be the game where everyone's going to want to get some exposure for a good reason. A 240 over-under. Clippers favored by 2.5 in this game. Looking at the New Orleans side of things first, obviously I mentioned it's going to be a popular target. Julius Randle, Anthony Davis, probably the guys that are going to garner a ton of ownership here, and for a good reason. Davis has been outstanding lately, averaging 66.3 fantasy points on 31.6 real points, 15.2 rebounds per game over his last 5. Clippers have been pummeled by opposing big men. They rank 28th in defensive efficiency to centers, allowing 25.1 points, 15.9 rebounds per game. They've given up 51.2 points in the paint, along with 45.7 rebounds. Anthony Davis is pretty pricey. He's 11.6 on DraftKings, 12.7 on FanDuel. If you're fading James Harden, might be a good idea to get some exposure to Anthony Davis, who has just, again, been just outstanding. Feel pretty comfortable. He's going to get you 60-plus fantasy points. It's a pretty good spot here for him. I do like Julius Randle a little bit, 7,400 on DraftKings, 8,100 on FanDuel. Obviously, the return of Nikola Mirotic is a little bit concerning. We have seen him play. We did see him play 34 minutes against Minnesota. That's promising to see. Obviously, the matchup for him really, really good. Does project to be a really, really strong play across both sites. Outside of him, Jrue Holiday, really, really good option here. Shooting 56.8% from the floor in 5 games this month. The Clippers really struggling to defend opposing backcourts. Clippers rank, they're also really struggling to defend the rim. 41% of Jrue Holiday's shots come at the rim. The Clippers allowing 62.6% shooting at the rim over the last 10 games. 8K on DraftKings for Jrue Holiday, 8,500 on FanDuel. Again, has been shooting the ball really well. This is a really good spot here for Jrue Holiday. I think he's one of the guys that I'm going to be trying to force in my lineups. Elfrid Payton, strong tournament option. Etuan Moore, Nikola Mirotic, guys that you can look at. Clippers allowing 44.3% shooting and 38.2% shooting to small forwards, which is a boost to Etuan Moore. On the Clippers side of things, you're looking at the primary guys: Lou Williams, Tobias Harris, Gallinari, Montrezl Harrell. You want the guys that dominate the team's usage. That being said, there is one value play that I'll get to in just a moment. But I think it's Tobias Harris and it's Tobias Harris and Danilo Gallinari that I have the most interest in from the starting lineup. the Pelicans pummeled by opposing small forwards, 22.9 points, 42.5% shooting. That's obviously a boost to Gallinari, who's topped 30 fantasy points in 3 straight games, 8 of his last 10 games. They've really struggled to defend the three-point line as well, allowing 38% shooting from beyond the arc over the last 10 games. That is a boost to Gallinari, who takes 36% of his shots from 3. I like Gallinari a little bit more in cash or in tournaments. Tobias Harris, second on the team in usage at 23.4%. I like him a little bit more in cash, also in GPPs. But New Orleans has a lot of opposing power forwards to shoot, 47.5% from the floor, 37.3% from 3. Obviously, Lou Williams and his 30% usage rate off the bench is really, really appealing here. 6,700 on DraftKings, 6,600 on FanDuel. You do expect him to be able to put up a really strong game in the spot. Has struggled and a little bit in back-to-back games. Not the best of matchups for him, but the assist and scoring upside is definitely there for Lou Williams. Patrick Beverley is the guy that I hinted at as far as being a value option. 3,700 on DraftKings, 3,800 on FanDuel. Pelicans really, really bad against opposing point guards, and Patrick Beverley has a tendency to play a little bit better in some of these fast-paced games. Has been playing more minutes of late. 25 against Orlando, 34 against Detroit. I think he's a really, really strong cash and tournament option. We've seen, like, in the Phoenix game where he had a big game, against some of these faster-paced games, he does come out and play a little bit better. Last 2 games against New Orleans, averaging 28.3 fantasy points against them. I like him in cash and tournaments as a value. You can look at Montrezl Harrell in GPPs. You can look at Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Avery Bradley in GPPs, or on like FanDuel where you can drop their score. But I think it's mostly Beverly, Tobias Harris, Gallo, and Lou Williams for me. But that's going to do it for today's slate. That's all 6 games. I will actually be back tomorrow. We have a 6-game slate on Tuesday, so I will be doing a podcast tomorrow for you guys as well. But good luck in all your contests tonight.